It was a crisp, quiet morning in a small Midwestern town. Birds chirped as the sun crept over the horizon, casting golden rays over suburban streets and school buses. Families sipped coffee, kids rushed out the door with backpacks slung over their shoulders, and local radio stations played upbeat tunes to start the day. It was the kind of morning that felt safe, predictable, like nothing could possibly go wrong. But within hours, everything would change. America was about to be jolted into a nightmare, one it never saw. Coming miles away from that peaceful suburb, in the heart of a grim and forgotten neighborhood, lived a man whose mind had been twisted by years of darkness. His name was Elliot Granger. On paper, he was just another face lost in the system, a dropout, unemployed, a loner. But behind his cold stare was a storm waiting to break loose. Elliot's childhood was a breeding ground for chaos. Born to a drug-addicted mother and an abusive, absent father, his world lacked love, structure, and any sense of safety. By age 6, he was already torturing animals in alleyways and stealing from neighbors. Teachers described him as emotionally disturbed, but nothing was ever done beyond a few counseling sessions and stern warnings. As he grew older, Elliot's behavior escalated. He became obsessed with violent crimes, studied serial killers like they were rock stars, and wrote disturbing stories soaked in blood and control. By his late teens, he had been in and out of juvenile detention for assault, arson, and threats against classmates. But each time, the system released him, labeling him as troubled, but never dangerous enough to contain. By his early 20s, Elliot had become a ghost, living off the grid, disconnected from family, with no social media, no job, and no ties. But beneath that silence, something monstrous was brewing. He believed the world owed him, and he planned to collect that debt in blood. On that ordinary morning, as America went about its daily routine, Elliot stood in front of a mirror, staring at himself with dead eyes. He wore black, carried a stolen duffel bag full of weapons, and whispered the words, "They'll remember me now." And just like that, the storm began. It started at exactly 10:14 a.m. Elliot Granger walked into Riverpoint Mall, the busiest shopping center in the state, disguised in a security guard's uniform. The morning crowd was thick, families shopping, teenagers hanging out, parents grabbing coffee. No one noticed the duffel bag slung over his shoulder, or the way his eyes scanned the crowd like prey. Then, without warning, he pulled out an assault rifle and opened fire. The first shot sent shockwaves through the building. Screams echoed off the walls as people ran for cover, trampling one another in panic. Security cameras captured the horror, Elliot calmly walking through the chaos, firing with mechanical precision. He didn't run, he didn't yell, he moved like he'd practiced this moment 100 times in his mind. In just 11 minutes, 27 people were dead, and dozens more injured. Among the victims were children, elderly shoppers, and even a pregnant woman. The brutality was beyond comprehension, and when the police arrived, Elliot was already gone, vanishing into a maze of underground service tunnels and disappearing like a ghost. The nation watched in shock. News outlets scrambled to cover the breaking story, cutting into regular programming, with live footage of crying survivors, bloody hallways, and makeshift triage stations outside the mall. Headlines flashed across the screen. Massacre in Middle America. Who is the Riverpoint killer? 27 dead. Suspect at large. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #pray for Riverpoint and #find Elliot trended worldwide. Families desperately searched for missing loved ones. Candlelight vigils popped up across the country. Grief turned into rage. Fear turned into hysteria. The president addressed the nation that evening. With a somber face and clenched jaw, he called the attack an act of pure evil and promised that every available resource will be used to bring this monster to justice. Homeland Security, the FBI, and SWAT teams were immediately deployed. Roadblocks went up. Airports tightened security. A full-blown manhunt was launched. But for every hour that passed without Elliot being found, America's fear grew louder. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a psychological war. One man terrorizing a nation and somehow staying one step ahead. and for the first time in a long time, America felt helpless. To understand Elliot Granger is to step into darkness, a place where pain festers into hatred, and hatred evolves into something far more dangerous: purpose. Psychologists and profilers called him a textbook psychopath, but that label barely scratched the surface. Elliot wasn't driven by impulse or blind rage. His attack was calculated, deliberate, planned down to the last second. He left no manifesto, no political message, no demands. Because for Elliot, the act itself was the message. He wanted to be seen, said Dr. Clara Yates, a criminal psychologist who reviewed his background. Not understood, not pitied, just seen by a world he believed had ignored him his entire life. Interviews with former classmates painted a chilling portrait. He was quiet, distant, always scribbling in a notebook full of disturbing drawings. There was something off about him, one said. Not just weird, like wrong. He looked at people like they were objects. One neighbor recalled seeing him dissecting a dead cat in his backyard when he was only 10. A middle school teacher reported that Elliot once wrote an essay titled "How I Would Make the World Stop." But no real intervention ever happened. Just warnings, notes, files that got lost or ignored. By the time Elliot was 18, he'd been arrested 4 times, twice for assault and once for setting fire to an abandoned house. Still, no conviction stuck. He slipped through the cracks, labeled as troubled, but not dangerous enough for long-term confinement. The system isn't built for people like him, Dr. Yates said. It reacts. It doesn't prevent. Elliot exploited every blind spot. His motivations weren't political, religious, or even personal. They were existential. Elliot believed humanity was broken and that he was sent to reset the balance. He viewed his victims not as people, but as symbols, pieces of a society that rejected him. He studied mass shootings obsessively, kept a journal of every major attack, and rated them like sports scores. His chilling goal wasn't just to surpass them, it was to become the one everyone feared the most. What's perhaps most terrifying is this: Elliot didn't snap. He evolved, slowly, quietly, while the world wasn't looking, and when it finally did look, it was already too late. After his brutal massacre at Riverpoint Mall, Elliot Granger was caught in a matter of days. The nation breathed a collective sigh of relief when he was finally apprehended in a remote cabin, holed up and armed. The media heralded his capture as a victory, and authorities promised swift justice. But behind the bars of Halcyon State Penitentiary, Elliot's story was far from over. Halcyon was known for housing the most dangerous criminals in the country. With its towering walls, armed guards, and advanced surveillance systems, it was touted as impenetrable. Yet, Elliot didn't seem worried. In fact, he appeared calm, almost amused, as he was processed into the facility. To the guards and officials, he was just another high-profile inmate, a maniac waiting to face trial. They couldn't have been more wrong. In his first few days, Elliot remained silent, observing the routines of both the guards and his fellow inmates. He made no friends, no alliances. Instead, he watched, carefully and without emotion. He noticed the cracks in the system, the blind spots, the small lapses in security that everyone else ignored. Over the course of months, he meticulously studied his surroundings: a faulty alarm system in one of the storage areas, a gap in the fence where the wires had been poorly maintained, and a guard, Sergeant Dawson, who regularly took extended breaks to smoke outside, always just after the evening shift change. It was during these shifts that Elliot made his move. Using a smuggled razor blade, he spent weeks cutting through the flimsy metal beneath his cot, slowly carving his way into the ventilation shafts. The guards didn't suspect a thing. They were too busy keeping tabs on the other inmates, men they deemed far more dangerous. The night of the escape, Elliot was ready. He waited for the last guard change of the evening, knowing Sergeant Dawson would be absent. Then, with calculated precision, he slid through the ventilation system and into the shadows of the facility's maintenance tunnels. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. This was it. At exactly 3:43 a.m., the alarm rang out, but it was already too late. Elliot had vanished. The authorities didn't realize he was gone until 4:15 a.m. when they attempted his routine head count. Panic erupted. Security footage showed nothing but an empty cell and a gaping hole in the floor. Elliot Granger was free again, and this time he was more dangerous than ever. The moment authorities realized Elliot Granger had escaped, the country was plunged into panic. The airwaves were filled with urgent news updates, warning citizens to stay indoors. Local and national law enforcement agencies were mobilized, and the FBI launched an all-out manhunt, sparing no resources. Roadblocks were set up across multiple states. Helicopters scoured the skies. Even the military was put on standby. But despite their best efforts, Elliot was already a step ahead, slipping through their grasp like sand through their fingers. As days turned into weeks, fear settled over the nation like a suffocating blanket. Schools were put on lockdown, malls were emptied, and every shadow seemed menacing. The public's anxiety skyrocketed, knowing that someone who had already committed an unthinkable massacre was now free and hunting again. Media coverage was relentless. Endless broadcasts, interviews with survivors, and reports from authorities created an atmosphere of hysteria. The public's obsession with Elliot grew with each passing day. They wanted answers, they wanted closure. But all they got was a chilling silence from the man at the center of it all. Elliot was no longer just a fugitive. He had become an enigma, a symbol of a broken system that had failed to contain him. The more people looked for him, the more elusive he became. He had managed to blend into the chaos of America's vast urban sprawl, moving from city to city, using false identities, and leaving no trace behind. He knew the law enforcement protocols. He knew their routines. He was playing a game of cat and mouse, and he was determined to win. For months, there was no sign of him, no sightings, no leads. But the most unsettling aspect of his disappearance was that it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a premeditated act, something he had planned for years. Elliot didn't just want to disappear, he wanted to disappear on his own terms. Then, one night, a chilling video surfaced online. It showed Elliot standing in front of a camera, a smug grin on his face. He spoke directly to the public. "You still haven't found me, have you? I'm right here. Always have been. Just wait." The video ended with a flash of his trademark chilling smile. Since then, Elliot's fate has remained unknown. Some believe he died in hiding, others think he's still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to return. But one thing is certain, if Elliot Granger resurfaces, it will be on his terms, and the world won't be ready for what comes next.